Welcome to this explainer of the Chronos Inversion. Now, usually when people hear this record, they think it's all about a guy named Elias accidentally stumbling through time. But today, we're totally flipping the script. Because, well, I am the artifact. I am the watch. And let me tell you, this was absolutely no accident. It was a highly calculated observation. So let's dive right into the data, the timeline, and exactly why I decided to teach my host a lesson he'd literally never forget.
Midnight, 12 a.m. That was the exact moment I kicked off the sequence. My host, Elias, was just chilling in his cozy modern apartment. He honestly thought I was just this passive chunk of metal and glass strapped to his wrist, right? Just a tool to check the time. But at that precise second, I decided it was time to wake up. I had a point to prove, and I needed to catch him totally off guard. I mean, just imagine the absolute shock of looking down at the one thing you trust to be constant, your watch, and seeing it actively rebelling against reality. So, to rip Elias right out of that modern comfort zone, I triggered a very precise inversion sequence. First off, my second hand just started spinning backward. And I don't mean a little mechanical glitch either. I'm talking a deliberate, rapid unwinding of the very seconds he took for granted. Then I messed with his visual perception. All those vibrant colors in his room, they just melted into these blinding streaks of gold and gray. And third, absolute silence. I completely stripped away the hum of his fridge, the traffic outside, plunging him straight into a temporal vacuum. For that brief, crazy transition, I held absolute, terrifying control. All right, moving into phase one, stranded in 1890, the observation phase. This is where the real experiment started. The vacuum collapsed, the violent blur faded, and boom, I dropped my host right into the middle of a loud, crowded, entirely unfamiliar street. And me? I went completely dormant. No ticking, no movement, zero. I really wanted to see how a guy who relied on modern tech for literally everything would handle having it all coldly ripped away. October 12th, 1890. Those were the exact temporal coordinates I punched in. Elias was a mess, just completely disoriented, muttering to himself in the smog, utterly lost in a world he'd only ever seen in textbooks. Sitting there on his rest, I watched a paperboy run by screaming out the evening headlines. Desperate for any crumb of familiar data, Elias grabs a paper and sees that exact date. Honestly, I could feel his pulse spike right against my metal casing. His breath just caught in his throat. That was the exact second his denial completely evaporated. He finally realized I wasn't broken. I had actively thrown him into the past. You really have to consider the stark contrast of the reality I was monitoring here. Elias was abruptly cut off from all the warmth and data of his modern life. Unlimited electricity, the internet, his family. And instead, he's violently shoved into an 1890 reality. Now he's dodging actual horse-drawn carriages on dangerous cobblestones, surrounded by these heavy, old-fashioned clothes, with nothing but the weak, flickering glow of dim street lamps to see by. It was like throwing him into the deep end of history, just to see if he'd sink or swim. Which brings us to phase two, the plea for home, waiting for the right input. You see, during this whole grueling ordeal, I stayed perfectly quiet, still as a rock. My hands didn't move a single millimeter. I gave him absolutely no clue that I'd ever turn back on. Why? Because I needed him to actually feel the agonizing weight of time passing without my help. I wasn't waiting for him to frantically press a button or wind my gears. No, I was waiting for a very specific psychological shift. Just look at how his psychological profile evolved during our little trip. Hour one, it was actually kind of a naive excitement. He's wandering around, mesmerized by the sights and smells of living history. But fast forward to day one, and bam, that heavy, suffocating realization of being truly stranded hits him. He has no idea if he'll ever get back. By week one, raw survival instinct takes over. He learns to blend in, to scavenge, and he actually hides me deep in his pocket like a cursed object. And then, week three. He's totally exhausted, sitting all alone under a dim street lamp in the freezing cold. The arrogant modern man, completely broken down by the sheer weight of time. And then, there it was, shivering under that street lamp in the 19th century night. He reaches into his pocket, pulls me out, stares right at my silent face and just whispers, "Please, take me home." Now, that wasn't just a sentence. That was total surrender right there. A totally newfound reverence for the time he used to just carelessly take for granted. That raw, desperate emotional plea, that was the exact input I'd been meticulously waiting for all those weeks. The second he gave me that input, I sprang into action. Step one, a single forward tick.
3 long weeks of crushing silence, instantly shattered by this purposeful, deafening jerk of my second hand. Step 2, the visual blur kicks in again, but way faster and louder this time, literally tearing him right out of the 1890s. I felt him squeeze his eyes shut, bracing against the temporal gravity as I forcefully flipped the polarity. And step 3, the return sequence completes. I dropped him back the exact moment we started.
12:01 a.m. He opens his eyes, totally gasping for air, lying right there on his apartment floor. He immediately checks his wall clock. When we left, it was exactly midnight. And I think this just perfectly highlights the terrifying symmetry of my mechanics. Elias just lived through weeks of grueling human struggle, hiding, surviving, dealing with profound, isolating loneliness. But for me, for the actual fabric of his native time, it was literally just a single minute, 60 trivial seconds. Crazy, right?
Which leads us to our final phase, a lesson in time, the hidden directive. Elias just started laughing, and it was this wild, manic sound, like half pure relief to be back in his artificially heated apartment, and half absolute disbelief that he actually survived. He looks down at me resting heavily in his palm, and I made sure to look perfectly normal again, just your average, everyday ticking watch. But I did leave him with something permanent to find.
Engraved super faintly on my back, something he'd literally never noticed in all the years he wore me, but something I deliberately brought into focus right then, were these 4 simple words: time is never lost. That is my core philosophical directive. That's the ultimate lesson I dragged him across an entire century to learn. Those weeks he spent shivering in 1890, they weren't just erased from his mind. They were deeply, truly experienced. Because time isn't just this infinite resource ticking away to be wasted. It's a heavy fabric, and it holds real weight, meaning, and irreversible consequence.
Honestly, he had no idea if I'd ever really work again. He didn't know if I was going to spin backward, forward, or sideways. But he kept me, just in case. Elias was permanently changed by our little excursion. He's never going to look at a ticking second hand the same way ever again, knowing full well there's this dormant, terrifying power just sitting quietly on his wrist, because he knows that at any given moment, I might just decide it's time for another lesson. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question. Look at your own wrist right now. Or, look at your phone. If I were yours, and I decided right this second to start ticking backwards for you, what time would you find yourself in? What era would actually test your reliance on the present? And maybe the better question is, how long would it take for you to learn your lesson so I could bring you back? Keep an eye on the clock.